All right, today is the day, and it is an Arete Supercar day. I have like 4 major parts of the car that need to be worked on before we can move on to disassembling the car and painting things before the final reassembly. Well, one of those things is the construction of the front grille, kind of slash the splitter, that combination up front here. And before we can form and fit all those parts, we need to kind of button up some of the front end assemblies. Some of those things that directly affect that whole front grille, front assembly system. Now, without further ado, let's jump in and see what I'm talking about. Now, a video or two back, we built this under dash structure that I needed to bolt back into place. We're going to need this front subframe to be bolted in its final position, and that bracket helps to make sure that it doesn't move. With that in place, we're going to get some of the sheet metal up front tightened up as well and refined. Now, with all the sheet metal up here, I had to pick up some more M16 bolts and get it all secured and tightened up. A few of the spots needed to be drilled and tapped to give it even more secure connection to the subframe. Now it's ready for the underhood components that we need in place to verify their placement. I have plenty of room for most of the stuff under there. It'd be good to know there's no interference problems. First off, I'm installing a secondary water pump at the front of the car. The mechanical pump in the engine may have enough power to push the fluids all the way up here and back, but I don't want to find out it can't and then have to do some kind of retrofit solution. This will also help in controlling the hot water through the heat exchanger for the heating and the defrost. That heat exchanger and blower will also be located up here, but I'm not going to work on that until after the car's on the road. Most importantly, we need to get the bonnet fixed in position. This is going to be critical for having a way to adjust the panel gaps on the final assembly and for us to locate the components in relationship to the subframe as we build this grille and the splitter. First thing we're going to work on is some rubber stops or little grommets that fit in each of the corners of the bottom side of the bonnet and hold it in position. Now, up here in the corner by the windshield, we're going to use a little button style that has a little nipple on it. You drill a hole, pull that nipple through, stretch it out, and then it expands back and locks itself in the hole. Our problem here is this corner, the fiberglass is pretty heavily reinforced in this corner. So we're going to have to grind out just a little bit of material right around the hole until we've got it sufficient that we have the thickness and the thinness, I should say, that we want so that nipple will lock in and it's fixed. Up in the front, I've got some big heavier ones. Now they're adjustable into the sheet metal. Got a little gap in here where I can screw it up and down and adjust for the height there. Another little problem up here is the radiator cap has a little interference problem with the little tabs that stick out the edge of the cap. So we're going to pull off the brace, take that same die grinder and cut a little notch just to clear for that little ear on the radiator cap. Got that done, throw that brace back on. Then we're going to work on some other mechanisms under the dash. First of those, we're going to go to the wrecking yard and found an old Mercedes that had an excellent latching system. A little U-bolt comes down, pushes into the recess of the latch mechanism, and it locks. Pull on the cables, and it releases. Another thing we're going to do is we're going to steal the windshield wiper mechanism out of the same wrecking yard and an old Mazda. This is the way most windshield wipers work on the modern cars. Instead of having just a wiper that goes back and forth, the motor actually turns round and round, pushes a rod back and forth, creating that rocking motion. On the ends are these little bearings. So we made a template of the latch mechanism and the bearings. Going to take those, cut them out, go back to our car and trace them into place and get working on making them fit. Now with the windshield wipers, it's pretty simple. It's just going to take 2 holes for the bolts and then a larger hole for the winding mechanism, the rotating piece. But on the latches, it takes this big T-hole and a couple of holes for the bolts. Luckily, this Mercedes had a system, and probably why I chose it, that there's 2 latches instead of just one in the center where the bonnet could rock back and forth on the center latch. It's got 2 latches, going to make it a little more secure. Of course, the holes, simply just drill them through with a bit of the size needed for our bolts. But on the larger hole, we're going to go to a step drill and just keep working until we have the proper size hole for the little bearing rocking mechanism to fit through. With that done, there it is. Pretty simple. With the little T-hole, Little different thing. We're going to take our step drill. We're going to drill again, but this is just to get the radiuses of the corner. We want a nice smooth transition into each of the corners. With the corners all drilled out for a radius, going to take the little oscillating saw and go ahead and trim that baby out. And of course, not shown in the video is go back with the file and clean up all the edges, smooth them up. There'll of course be more of that once we go to finishing the car, getting ready for paint. But until now, the hole is all we need just to make sure we have everything fitting. As I said, it rocks down, locks the U-bolt in place. That's going to be pretty simple. And the wiper, of course, turns back and forth by the little mechanism underneath that goes back and forth by those push rods. Clearance under the hood for the wipers to semi-recess and be under the slipstream of air. Now up to the front, we got some hinges that you saw in a previous video. I put a little clay on some bolts in the back, and I'm just going to press that onto the sheet metal to kind of give me an idea where I need to cut a couple of holes. I need to cut those holes because that assembly of that hinge has some bolts that go through the pieces that are the mechanism of its rotation. And they have to be recessed into the sheet metal because I want that hinge to be bolted up tight to the sheet metal. So the holes I'm drilling now are just for recesses for the mechanism bolts. I'll drill them out pretty big because they need to be the size of the bolt head. With that up against the sheet metal, I'm able to mark it and go back and get ready to start drilling for the hinge mounting itself. 3 holes. 2 of those I'm going to use a rivet nut to hold it in place. The 3rd bolt will go all the way through the sheet metal. In the front of that little crash structure there is a little hole that I'll be able to access the backside, put a wrench on it while it gets tightened up. And that should be sufficient, the 3 bolts, to hold the hinges in place. Now these 2 hinges on each side pivot forward and up. You'll see in just a moment as we go through the process of it. And once I got this in place and seeing how much the movement is up and forward, I decided to do something radical. These front lower quarter panels, I decided that they would actually lift and clear the whole splitter front end assembly. And so I've decided to bond this lower quarter panel onto the bonnet itself rather than have it fixed onto the base system. This is going to simplify things a little bit, make me able to get a little better finish of the splitter itself. So I mixed up a slurry of fiberglass strands, flocked cotton, and milled fiberglass, make a putty with some high strength in it. Had some tape that'll hold this thing in place, but with it just rocking down there, you're just going to take 1 clamp, just a pair of vice grips, go on the inside and clamp onto the flange of the 2 pieces together. And then overnight those things will bond and be forever a part of the bonnet itself. Now with those lower quarters bonded on and the bonnet itself secured in this final position, I'm ready to start to lay out the splitter. Now this is going to be one of those most detailed, intricate pieces of this whole car, so there's going to be a full video of that process some other time. It's going to take multiple molds and a lot of carbon fiber and some real detail-oriented stuff. But I thought I'd give you a sneak peek and let's see how that's going to start out at least. I went in here and put a light suspended from my ceiling, a little spotlight straight down into the center of the car. And with a piece of expanded polystyrene foam underneath, I have a perfect projection of the profile of my hood line, which we're going to put down as kind of a base coordinates for our splitter. Of course, the splitter is not going to match it exactly, but that's going to give us an idea of where a starting point. I have some kind of calculations or some dimensions in my head, but you're going to see me here now just to go back and forth with a ruler and a straight edge to start creating the shape of our splitter. I also took a little plumb bob, go off the corners to make sure I verified that I'm straight down and to get this thing symmetrical as well. Now this splitter is going to have some fairly large winglets on these outside corners. So that's what I'm laying up now. Those winglets will actually be creating a vortice across the tires and across the side of the car that will trap air under the car and be using the air under the car as a downforce option as well. The splitter comes to a point, a little more of a point than the actual bonnet itself. And that's what I'm laying out now. From that point, you go across and there'll be another plane that deflects alongside the crash structure that'll push air behind the tires into the braking system. That'll exit behind the tires along that arch you see between the wheels under the door. Now once I get all these laid out, I'm going to transfer all those dimensions onto a piece of paper because I need that paper to actually flip and do a symmetrical layout on the opposite side. So I just put the paper on top of the next piece of foam. That piece of foam, a couple inches thick, going to make this thing in total 3 inches. And that'll be all whittled down, sanded down, and made to create our shape. But transfer that back onto that piece of foam with our template that we've created. With the template done on one side, flip it over in a mirror image, and we can create two pieces to be matching exactly. I'll take those, cut them out, and it's time to attach those together. A little sanding just so I have a good edge for all these pieces to fit together. And another way to bond them a little better. Now this foam actually will bond pretty good by itself, but it does have kind of a glossy surface. We're going to rough it up, put a couple of holes. The expanding foam that we're going to use as our glue will go in those holes and kind of lock it all together. Now, expanding urethane foam will actually eat away styrofoam, but the trick is that this stuff cures so fast that it doesn't have time to really take its effect on the styrofoam. So this is just the same stuff you'd use at any construction for expanding into insulation. Going to bond all these pieces of foam together, weight them down with some heavy pieces. Of course, do the same on the other side. I found that sitting here on the back of the Leviathan, there's a little bit of a slope and it was kind of sliding on that foam. So I took a couple of screws just to push through it and lock it in place. And there we have it. Our foam all ready to be sculpted into a beautiful splitter. Ready for the next video. Once we get this front grille finished up, it's onto the doors, the rear bumper, and tidying up the suspension. Then we'll take it all apart, clean it up, and get things painted. Now, I don't know about you, but I'm ready to start building a car rather than making all these parts. Well, that's our video for today. Thanks for stopping by. Come back, see us again.